Be the Talk, episode 368, featuring Karen Catlin. Welcome to Be the Talk. We go behind the talk 7 days a week for tips and techniques to help you change the world. I'm Nathan Eckel, and a talker myself. I'm interviewing others who change the world with their talk. You can too, even if you've never given a talk before. Let's get started with today's show. We are live with Karen Catlin. Karen, are you ready to talk?
I'm here. I'm ready. Let's go.
After spending 25 years building software products, Karen Catlin is now an advocate for women in the tech industry. She is a leadership coach, speaker, and co-author of Present, a Techies Guide to Public Speaking. Karen Catlin, welcome to the talk.
Thanks. Great to be here. So 4 years ago, I gave a TEDx talk called Women in Tech, the Missing Force. And the whole theme of the TEDx was forces shaping our future. And I decided to talk about this missing force, the fact that we don't have a lot of gender diversity in the tech industry.
Absolutely. And one of the stats that you cited in your talk is, and I believe it was back in 2014 or so, you said that as of then, from 2011, 3 years prior, computer scientists who were female dropped 50%, which is absolutely huge. And one of the things that I really enjoyed about your talk is that you gave you didn't just kind of come out and tisk, we're losing diversity and we're not having the right and that's important. But if you're kind of a white male like me, we hear that a lot. Okay. And what you did instead is you said, this is what happens. This is the consequence. It's not really about having a certain ratio. It's about when you deploy airbags in a car and you've got an all male team, then you use your male weight instead of female weight in your calculations and people die because you don't have the diversity on your team. Or if you are applying for patents, actually, you're going to get 20% fewer cited patents when you only have one gendered team. That's me kind of reversing what you said a little bit. But that stuff really helps me to snap out of it and realize, hey, this is about working smarter and getting the job done instead of just fulfilling quotas. So I am just so really happy about what you're doing in terms of making a compelling argument for diversity and inclusion and all of those things. Really the best argument that can be made.
Well, thank you. And we really want diverse teams so we build the right products that are really going to help our world basically moving forward. So that is definitely a key message. I certainly hope that people also want to include all sorts of different people in their workplaces because it feels like a moral imperative. We're all good people. We want to include people from all sorts of backgrounds and genders and so forth. But on top of it, there's so many business reasons. There are the reasons for building the right product as well as financial reasons. And there is so much research out there that talks about and has proven that companies with diverse leadership, diverse workforces are better financially than their competitors. So there's all these reasons why we need to make it happen. And what I am focused on now is demystifying how do you actually do that? How do you actually create an inclusive workplace where everyone can come and thrive and do their best work and contribute to the success of their company, their mission, and so forth?
So tell me about some of the impact of your first book. I know you have another book that's rolling out. I'd love to hear a couple of additional case studies in addition to me of how you get this message across, this real results-oriented, benefit-oriented, everybody. It's a holistic because everybody benefits. Like you don't lose your wife or your girlfriend unfortunately in a car crash because there's no longer a weight miscalculation. So give me a couple examples of how you've really helped other people like me kind of have that light bulb come on and realize that you're not on a soapbox. Instead, you're trying to bring about better results for everybody.
Yeah. So, let's talk just about my first book for a minute, and then we can move on to my new book. The first book I co-authored with Purnima Vijay Shankar, who is another woman in tech, and it's all about public speaking skills for what we call techies. So people who are working in the tech industry in technical roles or technical capacities. And so many of these people are introverts. It's sort of something about the industry attracts introverts, and so many introverts think they can't be up on stage or giving presentations at company meetings and so forth. They shy away from it. And so our book demystifies how to do that, breaks it down, makes it very attainable in step-by-step sort of way. And the reason I wanted to write this book, you may be thinking, well, what does that have to do with this message about diversifying the tech industry, Karen? What it has to do with is I firmly believe that public speaking is like a multivitamin for our career because it accelerates and strengthens everything else we're trying to do. And it provides us with visibility so that others know about how awesome we are. And so that leads to career growth, which is so important for women as well as members of other underrepresented groups who might not have the networking and the supporters and advocates they need to accelerate their careers. So they can take things into their own hands by doing more presentations to showcase their expertise. So I love the tie in there. But the other thing that happens with my book is that these people who, once they are encouraged and start becoming public speakers, they start becoming role models for people who are just a step behind them in their own career. So they're breaking myths, stereotypes about what it looks like to be a leader in that industry, which in tech, it tends to be white and male. So every time I see a woman or a person of color or a person with from some other underrepresented group getting up on stage, I'm like, yes, go, because that helps break the stereotype of what it looks like to be a leader, to be successful in the industry. And that is going to have a ripple effect, right? So that's why I wrote the first book.
Yeah.
Can I move on to my second book now?
Sure,
Do you have
love to hear it.
on that one? Okay. So the second book came out the beginning of January 2019, and it's called Better Allies, Everyday Actions to Create Inclusive, Engaging Workplaces. And I started focusing on this concept of allyship a couple of years, about 4 years ago, because I realized, okay, I can help all these people get more visibility and lean into their careers and coach them to success. But unless the overall workplace environment changes, they're not going to really be as successful as they could. They are not going to be able to reach their full potential unless the workplace changes around them to become a culture that's more welcoming and more inclusive. So I wrote Better Allies as a way of breaking down, well, what am I supposed to do? I am just a, individual contributor, or I just lead a small team or whatever. I'm not the head of HR or people at my company. I'm not the head of diversity and inclusion. I'm just whatever. What am I supposed to do? Well, there are things that people can do every day that will make a more inclusive workplace. And so that's the focus of my second book, Complete How To. It's the kind of thing I hope people read it cover to cover and just get it all in. But there's so much just sort of tucked in there that it should serve as a reference that people can go back to when, for example, they are kicking off a new project or undertaking a whole big new hiring campaign for bringing on new workers, or entering a performance review season where they have to give feedback to employees, or putting on a conference or an event where they want to have a more inclusive environment. So it's full of really everyday situations to be more effective and to be a better ally.
Well, it sounds like you've covered the entire personnel, human resources life cycle, whether you're doing an event or hiring or a adjustment or a downsizing or whatever. You're going to find amazing wisdom in Karen's book. And I love what you're doing for people in tech, because basically, especially with the public speaking as well as everything else, it's really just about it. I used to call it a soft skill. And now I call it a strong skill, because it's this personal empathy, human to human connection that is not weak. It's not soft. It's actually the only thing that's differentiating us from augmented or artificial intelligence, especially all the people I interview on AI, however you define that. It's absolutely huge. And I love how essentially you're teaching people to differentiate themselves by being able to tell stories and get up in front of other people and speak and differentiate themselves from all of the other commodity of, program, the way that we can often think about this. I just love what you're doing to get people out of the cubicle, up in front of other people, facing their fears, growing, and developing those strong skills, Karen.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, it's very fulfilling to me as well. And so thank you for sharing that passion with me.
Well, great. Talk Universe, I hope you've been enjoying Karen Catlin, her talk. Again, Karen, tell me the title of your talk, as I don't have that in your show notes. Women in Tech, the Missing Force. You got to check that out, and we're going to be right back in just a moment with the Blitz Round. And we're back with Karen Catlin. Her talk is called Women in Tech, the Missing Force, and it's time for the Blitz Round. We are going to ask Karen a series of either-or questions related to the preparation and actual performance of her recent TEDx talk. Karen, are you ready?
I'm ready. Bring it on.
All right. First off, were you invited to speak or did you apply?
I was invited to speak. Well, actually, let me change that. A friend of mine was invited to speak, and she was giving another TEDx talk the same month, and so she referred me. Excellent. Friends in high places, for sure. Karen, were you a memorizer, improviser, or a blender? Oh, I hate to admit this. I memorized it, and that is not a best practice because you kind of get in your own head and you're not interacting with the audience, and you can trip yourself up if you forget some key phrase. So I have to admit, I memorized it. I practiced that talk. I don't even know how many times, but if I did it again, it would be a blend. Good for you. And that's why we have Be the Talk. That's what this is for. What's a tip, tool, or technique that helped you? So I was so nervous leading up to my TEDx talk. I was nervous because it was going to be on a bigger stage than I had been speaking at. I had such an important message that I wanted to do a really good job. And of course, it was going to be recorded and put on YouTube, right? So all the stakes were high, and I was super nervous as a result. And fortunately, I heard about power posing from Amy Cuddy. Amy Cuddy of TED. Superstar. And so I power posed. I didn't know what else to do to control my nerves, but I power posed my way through my nerves. And I felt ridiculous doing it, especially when I was backstage and the other organizers were back there kind of getting everyone mic'd. And I'm like power posing and I'm walking around and I'm like, I'm going to be good. And they were looking at me strange, but I didn't care because I was power posing, and it worked because when I actually went out there to give my talk, no nerves at all. It was just so amazing, and big fan of power posing as a result. All right. So Talk Universe, if you haven't seen Amy Cuddy's TED Talk, think Wonder Woman pose and just power posing all around. It gets results, and our physiology really impacts everything else we do, which is probably a reason why I should be at a standing desk instead of a sitting desk. But I need to dial back my energy a little bit when I get to interview people. I get so excited. Karen, back to you. What was the most painful part of your talk that you had to cut out for time? That's such a good question. And we, as public speakers, are constantly cutting things out. That said, I have to admit, I was given a 20-minute slot, and they said, don't go over 20 minutes because you won't go on the YouTube channel. And I really wanted to go on YouTube. So I made sure that my talk came in at 19 minutes and so many seconds. So from the get-go, I had that in mind the whole way through as I developed my outline, figured out the stories I wanted to weave in, and provided, the data that I wanted to show. So I did not end up cutting anything, I must admit. It was from the get-go, a planned attack on that 20-minute time slot. Well, we've been enjoying this conversation with Karen Catlin. We are going to have a talk posted on our show notes page over at BeTheTalk.com. And in addition to that, we'll have a link to Karen's website at KarenCatlin.com, just the way that it sounds. Karen Catlin, Catlin.com. And we are back with Karen Catlin for the final word of advice. What is it? Embrace public speaking because it is that multivitamin for your career.
Karen Catlin, thank you so much for coming on the Talk today and sharing your wisdom with Talk Universe.
Thank you.